Welcome to the first video in this new series on the Passion of our Lord according to Luke. So looking at Luke's Gospel, we are currently in what's called year C. There's three Sunday reading cycles, A, B, and C, so we're in C. And so most Sundays this year, we hear from Luke's Gospel, kind of a passage and stuff. And most of it's, from his ministry, his teaching, his preaching, his interaction with other people. But then there's only like one Sunday where we actually hear the passion of Christ's suffering and death. Now, yes, at every Mass, we're coming into real contact with Christ's saving sacrifice, the gift of himself in the Eucharist. And so, there's always mention of death, suffering, death, and resurrection in the Mass, but actually in the Gospel, and then actually being able to spend more time just to reflect on that and deepen in Luke's accounts, or whether that's Matthew, Mark's, or John's, don't really get to do that. And so I just, as an opportunity, just preparation, especially for Easter as we're going through Lent, and for Palm Sunday, because we're going to do this long reading, and then in the big book I use, the Missal, it says there, if the priest can give a short homily, if he gives one. It's like, there's like 2 chapters, and it's like, just keep it short, keep it brief, which I get it. It's, kind of the high points. I try keeping homilies shorter. It's the days, the reading, the gospel reading there, it speaks for itself. Just the impact, the profoundness. There's little much I can add. But I'm going to go through these a handful of videos walking through chapters 22 and 23 of Luke's Gospel. And so just kind of going verse by verse, kind of breaking it open. I'm not going to be exhaustive, all right? I hope that this can be a little kind of good, just reflective for you and this Lenten season and even beyond. I'll keep these videos up. All right, now we're going to jump into the Gospel of Luke, his Passion account. And we're not going to start actually with, on Palm Sunday, it starts right at the Last Supper, kind of in the institution of the Eucharist. We're going to back up just a little bit with Judas kind of plotting against Jesus, and then kind of some other preparations. Jesus sends some of the apostles to go prepare the place. Decided to do that, just give that, because they're kind of just proximate preparation, and it's beginning of chapter 22 also. It's nice, clean cut, as opposed to starting like verse 14 or 15 in Luke 22. All right, so very much this first part will be Jesus handing himself over, but before we get there, we're going to hear about how Judas is going to prepare to hand Jesus over. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to put him to death, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and engaged to give him money. So he agreed. He sought an opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude. Now this is very you see here the feast of the unleavened bread. The feast of unleavened bread here drew near, also called the Passover. So these are used almost very interchangeably, even though they're separate. The Passover specifically refers to that the night that the Passover lamb is sacrificed, but it's also the first day of unleavened bread, which was a 7-day feast. But they're used kind of almost interchangeably sometimes, these titles, because these feasts are so connected, overlap. We hear the chief priests and the scribes, so those of the Levitical priests, the kind of the head priests in the temple, and scribes, those that know the law, are seeking how to put him, Jesus, to death, how to kill him. They want to know how to do it, kind of apply how, for they fear the people. They're not going to do it out in the open, all right? They don't want to start a riot or cause, want to do it kind of, a hidden manner. And then Satan entered into Judas. So this idea of Satan entering into Judas Iscariot, it's not to take away from Judas's responsibility, but actually it's pointing at Satan is also here. All right, you have all these who are plotting: the chief priests, the scribes, and you have Satan. I know my circles are just terrible on this with this mouse, but then also Judas. So these are all free acting people. They aren't like Satan isn't kind of puppeteering these people and they're kind of making them do it. No, they're free. But Judas in particular, he's one of the 12. So all the worse because he's been with Jesus for these last 3 years. So here he's kind of going to be the inside man who's going to hand Jesus over. So Judas, he went away and conferred with the chief priests. The officers here refer to the essentially the temple police, who would be Levites. When we think of the priests and Levites, the Levites are almost kind of equivalent to deacons. They assist the priests in the Old Testament. So these are the temple police, if you will, that were Levites. So he conferred with them how he might betray him to them, how he might betray here, hand over. The Greek is this is paradidomai, which it shows up again and again. It could be translated here as a hand over. So this betray, hand over. All right, and so it says, and they were glad. Actually, the word here is very glad. It's used with reference to the Magi. When the Magi see the star, they rejoice. They're extremely glad. All right. We see it Jesus when he's describing the lost sheep, the parable of the lost sheep. Right before he gives the parable of the prodigal son, he speaks of the one lost sheep, of the 99 he leaves behind. He finds the one. There's this joy, this great joy. And then Zacchaeus, when Jesus says, I want to come to your house, Zacchaeus is filled with this joy. And so there's this idea of kind of they're glad, but it's in a twisted way. All right. Luke's gospel in particular is very much a gospel of joy. All right. Especially what we hear around the Christmas season, the nativity and such, with the shepherds coming, the angels rejoicing, Mary, and kind of going to Elizabeth. They're all this joy. The joyful mystery of the rosary are all taken kind of primarily from Luke's gospels and stuff. Where we find them in the gospel text. So this joy, and we see here as Jesus is about to be suffer his death, there's this twisted joy going on by those plotting against Jesus. So they were glad. They were glad to hear, okay, we got this inside guy here who's willing to hand him over, and we'll be coming to this again, but hand him over, and then they engage to give him money. So important here. So they engage or agree is could be translated as agree, but they give. So they're going to hand him money if he hands Jesus over to them. All right, they would say, hey, hand Jesus over to us and we'll hand some money. Actually, the word there is silver, which points to Genesis chapter 37 when Judas suggests, hey, let's sell Joseph over to the Ishmaelites. Let's make some money off him. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him to these, so they get 20 shekels of silver. All right, so we see Judas here selling, kind of essentially willing to sell Jesus, the beloved son, just as Joseph in Genesis is kind of Jacob's beloved son, special, and his brothers are all envious of that, and don't like it. But Jesus is kind of a new Joseph. All right, he's going to be handed over by his brothers, by one of his own. And one other point with this, we'll come into this later, but the word here for betray, hand over, it's also when Jesus speaks of handing himself over in the Eucharist, giving himself, it's the same word, Greek word kind of root there. And so this interplay of Judas wants to hand Jesus over so that they can hand over money to him, but what is Jesus doing in the behind? Jesus is going to hand himself over in the Eucharist, and then he's going to hand himself over willingly to those that want to, put him to death. All right, so there's these, they think they've got him, but Jesus is like, well, no, I'm going to be giving of myself. You want to hand me over to someone else, for money? Well, I'm going to hand over myself freely. All right, so this, amidst all their scheming, Jesus is going to be essentially doing the same thing in a different manner. They're trying to betray him. Judas wants to hand him over, and what is Jesus going to do? He's going to hand himself over. And so they agree. They he agreed, or he gave his word. That's what the word there refers to. And sought an opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude. So we see here, sought an opportunity, a time where he can hand him over in the absence of the multitude. Not when there's a big crowd and stuff. We don't want to cause a big scene at this point, but he's looking for an opportune time. And he's looking for an opportune time. Jesus over. Well, Jesus has his opportune time when to hand himself over. So even though all these forces are trying to scheme against Jesus, Jesus is like, well, he's gonna work through that. All right. And then lastly, just this aspect here on these first 6 verses. The word sought here, sometimes translated as sought out, looked for an opportunity. This is where on Wednesday of Holy Week, this reading, at least where Judas is going to, is planning to hand Jesus over, it's called Spy Wednesday. And this reading is mentioned because he was looking for an opportunity, kind of spying out an opportunity. The irony is Jesus knows exactly what he's trying to do. And so he's going to make some plans so that spying out doesn't foil kind of Jesus's plan to have the Passover with his disciples. So we'll come back to that in the next video, follow next verses of chapter 22 of Luke.